Hello, listeners. Welcome to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey.
Hello, everybody.
Unlocking Your Truth is a talk show about metaphysics and spirituality. We broadcast live every Tuesday from 7 to 8 Pacific time.
Sometimes from 7:01.
And we broadcast from CIVL, which has the radio show on 101.7 FM across the Fraser Valley from the unceded territory of the Stolo
Nation.
And Unlocking Your Truth, we're a talk show about metaphysics and spirituality. And so we always choose a topic under that general umbrella. If you're new to the show, normally for the first part of the show, we talk about the topic. And if you're attending on the live stream, you can share your comments. And towards the end of the show, we normally open up for listeners to ask their questions, and we do a little psychic look for you. Today's topic is going to be, how do you help someone you care about who's having a hard time?
Great topic.
Great topic. And very topical for me. In the last few weeks, I've been doing lots of healing work and on people who are in extreme distress, actually. And the funny thing about the healings I've been doing the last few weeks is that they have been mostly requested by other people. So somebody's loved one is realizing someone that they care about is in distress, is having a problem, is having a hard time, and they want to help them. And so they've purchased a gift, a healing as a gift from me to help that person. Or they've referred that person to me because they, feel like I might be able to help them. And so as I've noticed that trend, because normally it's people who are just booking sessions for themselves, but it's been quite unusual that people are booking sessions for other people at the moment. And so as I've been doing that work, some thoughts occurred to me, both about the people who are receiving the healings and the people who are wanting to help the people who are receiving the healings. So that's one of the things that inspired the topic. How do you help someone you care about who's having a hard time? And we want to open it out to a general discussion. It's not just about somebody like me who gives healings, but I'm going to talk about it from my perspective. And then we can open up the discussion. And we've already had a few posts, so thank you for our listeners who've been making some suggestions on this topic. So as I've been thinking about it, first of all, I'm going to talk about the person who is offering the help or who wants to offer the help. And one question is that person giving of themselves in a balanced way or an unbalanced way? So if you're somebody who wants to help a loved one in distress, where is it coming from and where are you? Are you in a place of balance and harmony within yourself? Are you taking care of yourself first? Are you giving from a cup that is overflowing? It's like that analogy on the airplane, as you put your oxygen mask on first before offering a helping hand to this other person. And so are you giving to yourself in equal measure so that your giving and receiving is in balance? Or are you somebody who is draining themselves and depleting themselves by putting everyone else first and yourself last? Because if that's what you're doing, then that's not in balance, and you might end up one day being ill yourself unless you redress that balance. And I would say, there are people who are able to balance their giving and receiving. I would say, though, most people in this space of being a light worker, being a healer, being someone who wants to be of service to others, at some point on their journey fall into that trap of having their giving and receiving be out of balance.
People know that. Are people aware of that? A lot of people aren't familiar enough with their own emotions and emotional state to actually know whether they're in balance or out of balance.
Right. So are you exhausted? Is your energy focused on other people rather than yourself? Those are some clues. The other thing is, are you taking responsibility for everybody else? Because that's one of the temptations for someone who's more awakened and can look around and say, gosh, I see how that person might be helped or that person might be helped. The danger is to take responsibility for everyone else. Right. So it can be a learning experience to get to that place of giving unconditional love, of not expecting an outcome for what you give, and having your giving and receiving in balance. And a really great example of this is in Greek mythology, Chiron, the god of healing. I think he was a centaur. And he's referred to as Chiron, the wounded healer. And it's because in the story, he was an immortal being, and he taught one of the other Greek gods how to make an arrow. I think the other god was Hercules. And then he got wounded by Hercules with the arrow that he'd taught Hercules how to make. And it was a poison arrow. And so Chiron, the healer, then he was unable to heal himself, and he was in torment and pain to the point at which he couldn't bear it anymore, and he gave up his immortality. So Chiron's the wounded healer. It's how we give of ourselves without taking care of ourselves, without healing ourselves first. And Chiron in astrology is also, it's a asteroid, and again, it's got the same meaning, the wounded healer. So sometimes people are so concerned about others that they forget about themselves, and they extend all their energy on being responsible for the other people and trying to heal everybody else, so that ultimately they become depleted, they become the wounded healer. And it doesn't help them, and it doesn't help their loved ones either. Because you're not, if you're out of balance, then you're not really in a good place to help anybody else or support them in their healing process.
That's like a financial advisor who's giving you financial advice, but who's broke.
Right. That's right. Exactly. And I think there's a few of them around.
Oh yeah, that's true. And as a psychic, it reminds me, like when I first started in this realm, somebody said, well, if you're talking to the spirits or guides, well, don't ask guides about financial stuff, especially like if you're asking your Uncle Henry about finances and he died broke. Well, don't ask him about finances. Find a specialist. It's the same thing, I guess, with relationships. If you don't have enough inner balance to do it yourself, find somebody who can help.
Yes, yeah. And then, so still talking about the wounded healer, and then we'll go on to talk about the healee, the person that needs help. An even worse version is just complete self-sacrifice, to the point that they put themselves in mental, physical, and emotional stress or even danger. And I've seen a couple of people like that this week that have run themselves so ragged looking after their family that they're in an enormously high state of anxiety, or that their family member is so disturbed that they're actually in physical danger from them. And so, people do amazing things for the people that they love, especially mothers, especially mothers. Mothers will give it all away for their children, even if their children are misbehaving really badly, or, and so on. And sometimes it's because, they need their loved one. Well, here's another thing, that maybe they want a healer to fix their loved one for them, So the loved one will change, so then they can be safe and not have to look at themselves and shift themselves. And so in some cases, the person who's asking the healer to heal their family member or their friend needs the healing themselves just as much. And then when that person shifts, it actually loosens the energy up for the other person to shift as well. Because often people get locked in energetically. And so here's somebody desperately trying to help someone that they love, and their energy is all over the one that they're trying to help, to the extent that that person just can't move. They can't move because they don't have their own space and their own energy. So as soon as the one who is wanting to be the helper is given a healing and help to pull their energy back, that then the other person who's the one that's in dire need is freed up to shift. And I've seen that happen this week as well. So lots of things to consider, you know. It was interesting because when I posted this question on the Facebook group, everybody, lots of people were answering, well, you know, this is how you help people and this is how you help people, not really thinking about themselves in the process of as the giver of the help. So I think that's a really important perspective on this. So let's talk about the healee, or the one receiving the healing, the one receiving the help. And it reminds me of an English phrase. I actually think it's a European phrase. Somebody from Bulgaria told me that this was a Bulgarian phrase. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You know, so does the person want your help? Because sometimes we look at someone and say, oh, they desperately need help. But maybe they're not asking for help. Maybe they don't want any help, you know. Maybe they're not ready. Maybe they're at a point on their journey where they just need to sit and be stuck. So do they want your help? Are they ready to heal? Are they ready to make a shift? Are they ready to make some changes? Or are they in the place where they are stuck in denial, stuck in resistance, or a victim mentality? Because I often meet people who are stuck in that way. And usually the ones that I meet who are stuck in that way are the ones that come to me because they've got an entity in their space. They've got an entity in their space and they want it removed, but they're not prepared to change in the way they need to change in order for the thing to leave. So that's actually pretty common. And because they're not then taking responsibility for themselves, they want somebody else to do it for them. Ultimately, all healing is self-healing. The person receiving the healing has to want to change, has to be in agreement to making a shift and committed to doing it. And so if they're not ready, it doesn't matter what any of us do or say, they won't change until they're ready. Even a healer can come and move energy from their space. And if they're not ready, they'll just put it right back the way that it was. So as a healer, I always have to check that the healer is in alignment with receiving assistance, especially if that healing has been paid for by a friend or relative, as the case has been the last couple of weeks in my practice. I've had lots of people who have someone they love who's in distress, and so they say, Leslie, can you please help my son or my aunt or, you know, whoever it is. So the first thing I have to do is check that that person is in agreement with receiving a healing. Check that they're in alignment with receiving the assistance. And if yes, then we can help. And if no, we leave them alone, because from their free will, they want to stay stuck. So we don't have permission. We can't interfere with somebody else's free will. Sometimes though, the body personality level, the ego level is in resistance, right? And you can see that that level of the being is digging its heels in and does not want to change or receive a healing. But if we go up to the soul or the oversoul, then we might find a level of their being that says, we're in agreement, it's in agreement, and then the healing can happen. But the body personality level might be resisting and fighting the healing. So there's a dissonance between the higher being and the body personality level of the being. But anyway, if the person's soul is in agreement, then we can help them. So again, this thing about, well, you know, does this person want your help, and are they ready to shift and change? If not, then you have to be prepared for that and be able to allow that person to just be where they are, to be neutral, to release expectations. Even if you see an obvious way that their life can be made better, they might not be ready to listen. They might not be ready to take that advice. And this is, again, it's especially hard for parents, for mothers in particular, to see their child suffer and to see their child refuse help. It's like they want to force the help on the child and force them to be better, you know, and but if that person's not ready for that, then that person's not ready for that. All right, so you're listening to Unlocking Your Truth, folks, with Dr. Leslie, and tonight's topic has been, how do you help someone you care about who's having a hard time? We're going to continue this discussion a little bit after the break. We're just going to pause for the radio show for a few minutes, and we'll be back.
That's great. We got a couple of comments we can go through.
Okay.
I'm getting feedback when I speak.
Did you turn the sound off on Facebook and YouTube streams on your computer?
Yes, I did. It's coming from your microphone.
Well,
Speaker microphone, because you don't have a headset on. Anyway.
Okay, shall we begin again? Welcome back, listeners. You're tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey. And we've been talking about what's the best way to help somebody who's in dire need of assistance. And we've been through kind of like a discussion about, if you're the one that's wanting to give help, what are some things that you should take into consideration? And also about the person that you believe needs assistance, some things to take into consideration. So now I think we're going to just cover some of the suggestions that our listeners have made as the best way to help somebody. And so I think Corey's got a few suggestions.
Well, I've got something that I learned a long time ago when working with people, and that's something called secondary gain. A lot of people receive a secondary gain from staying in the place that they are. Depression is one of the things that people stay in depression quite a bit because they get all the attention from people around them, right? Or, you know, they don't heal because their husband or wife or their partner or their children or their friends give them all this attention that they necessarily wouldn't get. And it's not on a conscious level. It's on a subconscious level. So they're not really realizing it, but it is what's happening. They're staying ill. And I know depression's not a good, you wouldn't think depression would be a choice, but in some cases it is. Things do occur then, and you mentioned the word earlier, with a victim mentality or a victim emotional body, people will stay in that state just in order to get that feedback and that attention and that wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, you see that with I guess hypochondriacs are a good example in the medical industry. They keep going to the doctor to see the doctor, and you know, with all these illnesses. And one of the reasons is they're getting that attention. It's not about illness; it's about getting the attention.
Yes, and even worse, Munchausen syndrome, where they take they harm their child and take their child to the doctor.
Ooh.
And the other one is enablement. So, and now when you're talking about people who have addictions, for example, oftentimes the family will feel that they're helping them by paying their rent, by paying for gas in their car to try and keep them safe. And actually what they're doing is they're preventing that person to see the full consequence of their behavior. So they never reach that point where they're forced to look at themselves in the face, right square in the face. So I'm going to read out a couple of suggestions that some of our listeners made about the original question, which I'm going to read it out again. I've forgotten what exactly the word. How do you help someone you care about who's having a hard time? So Tammy said, depending on the person, I sometimes share my perspective and insights about how energy works in the world, if they are receptive, so it can serve as a comfort to them. And I think that's a great idea, Tammy. And I like how you said, if they are receptive. So she's taking into consideration that some people aren't ready to hear it. Some people are resistant to it. But if a person is in a space where they can receive that, then that's great. And actually that reminds me of another circumstance. Like I have, sometimes I help people who have serious illnesses, like really like cancer and so on. And sometimes all that person wants to do is just sit and receive. They don't want to learn. They don't want to hear a philosophy. They don't want to know things that they can do themselves, because they've just had such an overwhelming journey that got to them the point that that all they want to do is just receive. And actually receiving is not doing nothing, it's allowing themselves to receive the shifts and the changes. Another comment from Jennifer, and this is a good one too: be a good listener, because sometimes people just wanted to talk about their feelings, and that's so true. I remember every once in a while I get a client who they pay me for some of my time and then they do all the talking. And it used to really bother me, because I'd be like, you've paid for this, you should listen, you've paid for it, so you should listen. You should give me some space to give you some help here. And in the end, I just realized, well, that's the therapy for that person. They just need to talk.
And Danielle on YouTube says, in the end, it's their own solution that they come up with.
Yeah.
She also said a good thing is to be a good listener. She also has another comment. She's evaluating if it's a shopper, a buyer, or non. Some are enjoy their state. Some are willing to listen, but not to move. And the last are wanting to move or acting on their situation. And George says victim mentality gave them some love from others.
Yeah, I didn't hear all you said about that lady, but because I think she made 2 points, and one was some people will listen, but they're not prepared to move. And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Just because they listen doesn't mean they'll necessarily do what they have to do in order to shift and change. Exactly. Sometimes we hear a message for a long time before we actually act upon it, And again, especially in close relationships like the mother and the child, let's say the child is acting out in some horrendous way, whether it's taking drugs or harming themselves, and the mother might know for a long time, I basically have to find a way to get this child, help from the system. And they might put that off because as a mother, they just want to try and solve the problem for them, for example.
So yeah, Danielle says, talking again about listening, she says, since at the start they are creating their own problem. In a lot of cases, that's very true. Some cases, not so much.
Well, I mean, you know, and if we want to get really metaphysical about that, each one of us creates our own reality. So any challenge that shows up in our life, we have created it. And that can be very, very hard. That can be very, very hard to hear. But it's actually the good news. The good news, if you create your reality and something terrible has shown up in that reality, you can uncreate it just as easily as you created it. If you create it, you can uncreate it, you can dissolve it, you can remove it from your reality. And that's very, very hard for people to understand and appreciate. And especially when it comes to something like, Corey and I always remember meeting a lady in a sort of networking event who had, her child had been run over by a drunk driver. You know, and try telling that mother, and it's probably inappropriate to even try, that soul created that experience, and on some level that soul benefited from that experience, and on some level that soul gave the gift to the others that were close to that, you know, being through the events that it went through. It can be very, very difficult to appreciate that.
Yeah, the thing that I remember about that lady was that she sat there a couple of different events saying, "I've forgiven the person that's run them over," and then just goes into a rampage about them and just keeps going and going. I don't either. She doesn't understand what the word forgiveness means, or she's more probably she's just in a complete unrealization that she has that much anger and angst in her being, that she's saying things without even realizing the depth of what she's saying.
Yeah. So often people will be in a deep state of denial and they can't see themselves clearly at all, you know, and they will believe that I mean, I was, somebody else this week was consulting me about manifestation, and I was reflecting their energy back at them, and they were saying, well, but I you know, I know that, and I do that, and I know that, and I do that. But really, you would not be in the situation you're in if you did, right? So people don't always see themselves really clearly.
No, not at all. Not at all. Danielle says, to me, you either choose to be part of the problem or the solution. And it's very true. It is exactly that, right?
Yeah, very, very true.
Yeah, yeah. And just to touch on something very quickly, and you can cover it a little later on, and that was that Lori wanted to know, what changes does one need to make in order to remove an entity? So you can cover that a little bit later on.
Oh, I can answer that now. Own your space. Take
Close
responsibility
the door
and own your space. Okay, so again, that's another one, isn't it? Oh, I'm invaded by an entity. I'm a victim of this. You know, it makes me do this, it makes me feel that. But, you know, you create your reality. So you're allowing it, you're allowing that experience, you're allowing it in. So it's like, be a master of your own energy, own your space, be in a high vibration, let go of resistance, and I guess believe in yourself. Believe in yourself to transcend that situation. Being non-resistant is really important, so that you can just rather than have that energy attached to you, you can it will go through you. But also, it's like, know yourself. So really know what's happening here. Where and how is it attaching to you? What are you believing that's leaving you vulnerable? And then change the belief. So find out where's it's hooking in, what's it connecting to, and then move its energy, and then change your energy so that anchor point isn't there anymore for it to attach to. So those would be the principles. But I would also just say sometimes we need a helping hand from somebody else, right? And that's okay too. So, you know, asking for help from someone who knows how to do such things is also something that you can do in that circumstance.
I have a couple of comments here from YouTube, and Danielle says, reminds me of the 5 stages of grieving, what you were talking about earlier when somebody is working that. And Curious Soul says, some thoughts attract in similar tune energies and entities. So thoughts create reality. And the point I'd like to add is you've heard me say this so many times, it's basically a quote from the Bible that says, man had a spirit, an evil spirit, and we went to the master, and the master removed the spirit from him. But then he left the door open. And that spirit came back with 7 friends. You know, like that negative spirit came back with 7 friends. When you have an issue, when you have and it holds true for everything, when you have an issue with yourself or with entities, if you can move it, refill that space with something good,
Your own
consistent.
energy.
Yeah, your own energy and love and whatever it takes. If you fill that space with love, then it's very hard for the entity to come back. But if you leave the door open going, I wonder where that entity went. I wonder if they're still around. I wonder if they're going to attack me. Well, it's going to happen again, right?
It's so true. And I've seen that time and time and time again. In fact, entity clearing work is the toughest part of what I do. And it's for that reason that most people do not understand that they have any control over the situation or over their own energy. And they see themselves as a victim, and they're in huge resistance. And they won't take responsibility for their own space. So as a healer, you clean them out and give them information about how to own their space, like take this course, you know, read this book, do these meditations, and invariably they don't, and invariably they get reinvaded, or like you said, some different ones come in. Maybe the same being doesn't come back, or maybe it comes back and it brings its friends, and then they blame the healer, you know, for not healing them, because they've missed the importance of they create their own reality, and they are the ones that are responsible for their reality and their energetic space. Ultimately, the healer is more like a midwife or a catalyst that holds the space, that can move some energies, but it's really up to the person receiving the healing ultimately what they're going to do with that.
Yeah, Danielle again. I don't know if it's Danielle. I think it's Danielle. She says, "My native elders teach us who you are nourishing, your white wolf or your gray wolf," and that's a wonderful.
I love that
story from the First Nations.
Yeah, that's such wisdom in that story. Yeah, which wolf are you going to feed?
And that's so true. I mean, it's so true. We do that with everything, right? Now it's time to feed the ad wolf. We have to go for a small break, Dr. Leslie.
Yes, we'll be back after a few minutes. Shall we begin again?
Sure. Having problems keeping up with all the comments.
Oh, well, I'll give you let's pause a minute while you read through them, and then we'll begin.
Oh, no, I've got them all. It's okay. Just keeping up.
That's great, because I think the whole next section can be answering people's questions. And all right, so welcome back, listeners. You've been tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey. And tonight on our show, we've been talking about how do you help somebody that you care about who's having a hard time. And we've been looking at both the energy and experience of the person who's wanting to provide help and healing, as well as the person on the receiving end of it, and the different kinds of circumstances that can arise. Sometimes people don't want to be healed even. So yeah, over to the listeners, and what comments and questions do we have?
Curious Soul says, you need to write a prescription to follow the treatment, but need to have the authority of a doctor. Otherwise you heal them, but the problem is at the roots.
Yeah, the problem is always at the roots. That's right. And it's interesting because sometimes, I mean, I know people where they have physical symptoms and they want to solve the problem at the physical level. And they try all sorts of things at the physical level. And they can't hear that it's a mental, emotional root to the physical problem. So you're quite right, George, that a dis-ease will begin at an emotional level first. So the body will try to communicate through its emotions. But if you ignore it long enough, then that is going to get more and more concentrated and develop into physical symptoms, because that's the body screaming louder. Well, you didn't listen when I was giving you emotional information. So now here's some physical thing that you can't ignore. But there always is a root cause which is underneath the physical manifestation. That's why sometimes when people have cancer and they have the cancer removed and it seems like the margins are clear, that person is better. And then a few years later, the same problem comes back again because the root cause was not addressed. Only the physical manifestation of the root cause.
I have a couple things. Danielle says, how about healing your inner child? And also, I have something from Riley, but I'll do that to you after this one. And Bridie says, oh, you're always speaking with such relevance with whatever shows up in the morning for her, for just before your show. However, got a bit on with dealing with such right now. So she's going to watch the replay later. But this morning, you received something from Tammy. I don't think you read that one out, did you? Yeah. Sometimes share my perspectives and insights about how energy works in the world. If they are receptive, it can serve as a comfort to them.
Yeah, I did read that out. So just one comment on what Bridie said. People in my classes are amazed, right? Because some of them are 8 weeks long or 10 weeks long. And every week there's a different module. People will start experiencing in their own life whatever subject matter is coming up in the next module before they even know what that module is. So that doesn't surprise me, Bridie, that you've got similar stuff going on. Synchronicity at work. And then Daniela, who talks about the inner child, I think inner child work's really, really important. And most core wounding happens in somebody's early childhood. You know, so for they say most of our beliefs are laid down between the ages of 0 and 3 years old. And really, at that age, when we're not necessarily thinking in the same logical way we think as an adult, sometimes it's pre-verbal, we can't even speak, and we don't have a context for these experiences, and they become cellular, and those traumas inform the rest of our life, the reality moving forward. So to do work around your inner child, around when you were very, very young, and heal the traumas that occurred, and become the loving parent for your own child. I think that is super important work that all of us can benefit from exploring that. So thank you for that comment. Corey, we must have a few more comments, do we? Comments, questions?
Yes, we do. George was saying, Curious Soul was saying, he was talking about an emotional prescription, and what I was telling him is very true. It's that an emotional prescription, if you don't give somebody something to do on an emotional basis, it's not going to hold true. But it's also like I think it has a lot to do with value as well. If you give somebody advice and they're not asking for the advice, basically what you're doing is giving something for nothing without any relevance or without any perceived value from that person. They're gonna ignore it. But yet, a well-placed word here or there can be like a placebo, and even though you're not trying to fix something, it's actually going to help.
That's sort of lead by example.
Yeah.
Another way of saying it is, maybe this is not the right word, but be immaculate in your own energy. Keep your energy high, heal yourself, anchor the light in the world. And then you're leading by example, you're leading by showing.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily telling somebody, do this, do that, but you're being a loving, healing presence in the world. That's there for everyone to see, whether they consciously know why you feel and seem so amazing to them or not.
Yeah, very true. So Danielle also says, I'm really at a starting case. She says, wondering which technique to use, Reiki, quantum healing, energy. I'm confused on which to choose. I'd like to answer that.
Sure.
Somebody told me one time, and he was a master at healing, and he's known for hypnosis. He said one of his tenets was that if you only have one tool in your tool belt, somebody comes to you for healing, and that's not working with them, well, you kind of lost. So the best thing to do is take it, learn as many healing techniques as you can, and so you will finally hit one that really resonates with you. And when that happens, you become very powerful. Well, you don't become powerful, but you move that power through to other people.
And I'd like to add to that.
Sure, it's your show.
So there's an evolvement beyond the technique as well, beyond the label. So as humans, we have to categorize everything. We have to categorize everything and say, well, this is this and that is that. This is Reiki, this is healing touch, this is body talk, and then some of them get stamped with legitimacy. Okay, everyone accepts that now, and it's a way that we can grasp some sense of understanding and attach some legitimacy to something if it has a label like that. But at the end of the day, we're just talking about energy. We're talking about energy and manipulating and shifting energy with our intentions. That's all any of it is. It's one thing wrapped up in a framework and a system and some steps that you have to take. So when I do healing work, there's no modality. I'm in the moment with the energy that I'm in, reading it and observing what needs to happen. Now, did I learn different healing techniques? Yes. But I would say ultimately, there's a point at which the master discards the tools and the labels, just is with the energy.
Yeah, the one that resonates with you, it becomes your healing becomes. And the other thing this fellow told me, he says, if you're doing it like me, you're probably doing it wrong. So do it like you, because everybody has a different connection to spirit in some different way. Yeah. So it's all about moving through that.
I completely agree. And all of my students in my psychic development courses, I drum that into them. You're completely unique. So don't expect to do it like me or any of your classmates. And that frees them. I've met people who've done psychic development courses up the yin yang and not felt like they got anywhere. And sometimes the reason is because they're looking at everyone else and how everyone else is doing it and feeling like they're doing it wrong because they're not doing it like everyone else is doing it. And if they were just given the space to relax and be themselves and do it their way, then all of a sudden they're not stuck anymore.
Yeah. To just finish off with Danielle's comment, she just put some things. What she says is I want one that I can relate with my native ways, one that I can use as a shamanic base. And then George says, like the love for God, religions, and doing the same thing, but using a different system and rules standard. And Danielle goes back and says, is it possible to drop a link to your psychic development course? Thanks in advance. Sure, we can take care of that.
I didn't hear the last part. I don't know.
Oh, sure. Danielle was looking for a link to your psychic development course.
Oh, absolutely, Danielle. Yes. So we can do that at the end. We can pop that in, but you basically just go to drlesliephillips.com and it's spelled DRL.
I'll put it in Dr. Leslie.
And then on the top tab of the website, it says courses. And you click on that, it gives you an overview of all the courses. And then there's a tab that describes each of them in detail. And actually, I'm looking for students at the moment for my Unlock Your Intuition course. I want to start the next group shortly. And it's a fantastic course. It's this dual path of healing yourself and clearing your energy field to naturally reveal your intuitive abilities, and also training you in a framework of how to start using your clairvoyance and other abilities.
Yeah, I put that in both.
Yeah, and actually that's worth mentioning that I have a webinar tomorrow night, the Awaken Your Intuition webinar, which in part it's an introduction to that course, but in part it's a very excellent teaching in itself about what blocks your psychic abilities and what would you need to do in order to unblock them, as well as covering some of the different psychic abilities. So if you have time tomorrow night, anyone, then, well, depending on when you're listening to this broadcast, of course. So I'm talking about the 3rd of June at 6:30 Pacific time. There's a webinar, and you can sign up for the webinar on my website. So if you go to drlesliephillips.com and under free stuff, you'll see your webinar.
Yeah,
sign up.
I've sent them the link already.
Thank you.
Way ahead. So Tammy says, and I think you've already answered this question, do you have an opinion about soul retrievals bringing a deep healing source? Being a deep healing source, do you have an opinion about soul retrieval healing?
Yes, I guess I do. I do. I don't call it soul retrieval, but it's the same thing. And actually, I've got, I think, at least 1 or 2 of my Akashic Adventure workshops. They're also on my website. They're these 2-hour workshops. You can download them. We've done the past life one. We've done some soul retrieval work in that. Because what happens is we leave our energy. We deposit our energy around the planet in different lifetimes, different locations, and if we can retrieve that energy and pull it back, then we increase our energy and we increase our power, because that energy is latent. It's not being used for a useful purpose. And so I think that soul retrieval, or whatever name you want to call it, is something that is worthwhile to do. I mean, basically, when I do it, we go on a journey above the planet, and then we look at the planet and we look globally in the planet. Where are the repositories of your energy? Where have you left your energy? And you basically go and visit those locations and resorb the energy. And then, I mean, I think sometimes as well, the focus is on energy that was trapped in trauma. And I also think that that's very valid as well, that we lock our energy up in traumatic events, in pastime events, in our story about our victimhood, and we carry it with us, and our energy is locked away, inaccessible, not able to be used in our current present time creativity. And so all of those things, it's a really good idea to unlock that trapped energy so that you can have it available in present time, so that you can have all of that power focused in the now moment to create the life that you desire now.
Mm. So I have a comment. Thank you, Dr. Leslie. I have a comment from Riley, or a question actually, and we have about 2 minutes left. So if you can answer this for, she says, I have 5 kids and a husband. We have been together for 20 years and I'm feeling stuck. Can you please give me some clarity of what's to come for us in the future? Is there a future?
Okay. Well, I'll just make a comment. You know, what happens in families very often is that people's energies get very entangled. So everybody kind of merges energy. And that's why you get a lot of people feeling stuck, you know, or their dreams are passed them by. And often it's just because, again, it's back to this thing of owning your space. Love is not the same as merging. But families tend to merge energy. So if you've got 6 family members and you're merged with all of them, you have everyone else's reality in your space, and you're no longer completely in touch with yourself and who you are and your choices or your free will and what you need to do to make your life better, feel better for you. And so, again, I would advocate learning to own your space and clearing your space so that you are cleanly creating your reality rather than creating your reality in a muddled fashion. So think of your energy field as the signal that beams out to the universe. Are you beaming out your true self, or are you beaming out a muddle of everybody? And some of that's in alignment with who you are and some of it isn't. So you're not going to get the life that you truly would choose if it was just you and your energy that was sending out the signal. So the future prediction is it depends on you and your energy, really, and everyone else, if you're thinking of yourselves as a group together.
Well, Danielle said she's registered for your webinar tomorrow, so everybody's happy. And it's time to say goodbye to everybody. What a phenomenal show that was.
Yes, thank you everybody for listening to tonight's episode of Unlocking Your Truth, which has been about how do you help someone that you care about who's having a hard time. We'll see you next Tuesday from 7 to 8 Pacific time.
That we will. Take care all.
Okie dokie. I shall